The car was nothing but a heap of scrap metal in everyone's eyes, paint stripped to bare rust, frame corroded at every seam, the interior rotted through beyond saving. Liam Harper bought it for $120 at a liquidation auction, and not a single person thought to ask why. No one believed he knew something they didn't. But Evelyn Holt, CEO of Holt Motors, humiliated him in front of a crowd, in front of a news camera, in front of his 7-year-old daughter. She ordered that car crushed. That was the most expensive mistake of her life. Could Liam Harper protect that rusted car and his dignity before the tow truck took everything away from him forever? The morning started the way most mornings did in the Harper house, quietly, practically, without ceremony. Liam stood at the kitchen counter with his back to the window while the coffee brewed, watching a thin ribbon of steam curl up from the machine and dissolve into the pale light coming through the curtains. Behind him, Arya sat at the table with her cereal bowl, spoon moving in slow circles, while her stuffed horse sat propped against the sugar dish, as though it too had a place at the breakfast table. The horse was small and brown, its coat worn down to the nap from years of being carried and clutched and slept on, and Arya had named it Dusty when she was 4 years old, and had not seen any reason to change that since. Liam watched her out of the corner of his eye and said nothing about Dusty at the table, because some things were simply part of the rhythm of the house, and the rhythm of the house was the thing he guarded most carefully. He was 38 years old and had been a single father for 3 of those years, and in those 3 years he had learned that the structure of a morning mattered more than most people gave it credit for. Arya's mother had died in February, on a Tuesday, during a week when the furnace was broken and the pipes in the bathroom had been leaking for a month, and Liam had spent the weeks after the funeral fixing everything he could reach with his hands, because there were things he could not fix, and the feeling of standing still inside them was unbearable. He had rebuilt the kitchen table, replaced the furnace himself, recaulked every window in the house, and at some point in all of that, he had also, without planning it, built a life for the two of them, something small and careful and entirely their own. Arya was 7 now, and the morning routine was one of the things he held to with both hands. He poured his coffee and turned around. Arya was telling Dusty something in a low, private voice, one that was not meant for him, and he respected the privacy of the conversation and sat down across from her with his mug. Arya looked up and said, "Dad, can I come with you today?" School was out, and he had no one else to leave her with. He told her yes, and he told her to stay close and not to run, because the place they were going would be crowded and full of strangers. Arya nodded with a seriousness that made her look older than 7, and she squeezed Dusty once, not out of fear, but with the deliberate gravity of someone making a promise in front of a witness. In the backyard, hooked behind the truck, the flatbed trailer sat loaded and ready, and on it, covered in a canvas tarp secured with 4 bungee cords at each corner, was the car. He had bought it 3 weeks ago, and had not told anyone, not because he was hiding it, but because there was no one in his life who would have understood immediately, and understanding immediately was the only kind of telling that ever felt right to him. He stood in the backyard for a moment with his coffee and looked at the shape under the tarp, and the morning light moved across the canvas in a way that made the covered form look almost like something sleeping. His wife would have laughed. She would have told him he was the only man alive who could look at a heap of scrap iron and see something worth protecting. That had not been a criticism. It had been the truth. Liam lifted Arya into the cab of the truck. She tucked Dusty under her arm, looked out through the windshield with the wide and interested eyes of a child going somewhere new, and Liam started the engine. The truck and its trailer rolled out onto the road, into the pale early light of a morning that had not yet decided what it was going to be. 3 weeks earlier, the morning had been gray and cold and smelled of turned earth, and Liam had driven 40 minutes outside the city to a farm liquidation auction he had found listed in a trade newsletter that very few people still subscribed to. These were the kinds of auctions that existed at the margins of the collector world, not the glamorous estate sales with printed catalogs and preview nights, but the practical, unglamorous disposal of assets from farms and properties that no longer had anyone to tend them. The lots were listed in blunt, indifferent language. Farm equipment unspecified, hand tools, various condition, furniture assorted, miscellaneous metal, as is. He had driven out for a set of vintage socket wrenches listed in Lot 42, and he had found something else entirely. The auctioneer was working through the back of the barn when Liam arrived, dispatching lots at a pace that suggested he wanted to be done before noon. At the far end of the property, under a collapsed lean-to, sat what the printed sheet described as unidentified scrap metal, no documents, condition unknown. It was listed last, as an afterthought, the kind of item auction houses include only to avoid leaving it for the county to haul away. Most of the crowd had already moved on to a cluster of old engine parts near the fence. Nobody was paying attention to the shape under the lean-to. Liam paid attention. He walked toward it slowly, not because he was being cautious, but because he had learned long ago that speed communicated uncertainty, and he was not uncertain about anything he was doing. The shape was large and low to the ground, and completely obscured by 3 decades of accumulated grime, dried mud, and a partial canvas that had rotted to the point of being decorative rather than protective. He crouched at the driver's side, reached into his jacket pocket for the small flashlight he kept there out of habit, and swept the beam along the lower edge of the body where the rocker panel met the door sill. Then he moved the light toward the area just forward of the left front wheel, angling it until he found the chassis tag. He wiped it with his sleeve, once. The first 3 characters were CSX. The number following began with 3. He stood up, put the flashlight back in his pocket, walked back toward the auctioneer without hurrying, without looking back. The opening price for the unidentified scrap was $80. No bids. The auctioneer tried 60. Still nothing. A man in the back called out, 100. Liam raised his hand. 120. There was a pause long enough to suggest everyone was waiting to see if someone would go higher. No one did. The hammer came down. He drove home with the car on the flatbed, and the drive felt ordinary from the outside. A man in a work truck pulling a covered trailer on a county road in the early afternoon. That evening, after Arya was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and looked up the chassis number. The results came back in a way that caused him to sit very still for a long time. The 1965 Shelby Cobra 427 was one of the rarest production automobiles ever built in the United States. Carroll Shelby had produced the 427 variant in extremely limited numbers before the production line closed in 1967, approximately 300 examples, each carrying a unique chassis number prefixed CSX, which stood for Carroll Shelby Experimental. Auction records from the previous decade showed comparable examples selling between $1.5 million and $2.5 million. Fully restored, with documented provenance, the figure could exceed $3 million. Liam sat in the kitchen for a while longer after reading all of that, and then he closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed. The Holt Motors Charity Classic Car Showcase was the kind of event that had been designed to communicate several things at once: civic generosity, brand authority, and the implicit suggestion that anyone affiliated with Holt Motors had impeccable taste. It took place annually in the plaza fronting the company's regional headquarters, a glass and steel building that occupied half a city block, and on the morning of the event, the space had been transformed with sponsor banners, roped-off display zones, and a small stage where a string quartet played music that floated across the plaza with the cheerful purposefulness of atmosphere purchased in advance. A camera crew from a local financial news outlet was already on site, following Evelyn Holt's communications team for what was being positioned as a brand profile piece. Liam had been contracted as a support mechanic. His role was straightforward: transport 3 vintage vehicles belonging to private collectors, assist with any mechanical issues during the show, and remain on site until the event closed. The contract was quiet, professional work, the kind that made up the reliable middle of his calendar. He had loaded the client's cars that morning and had brought his own truck and trailer because the flatbed was already hitched, and he did not like leaving the Cobra at the house when he would be gone all day. He was not planning to display it. He simply did not want it out of his sight. Jackson Reeve met him at the entrance to the staging area, a lean, well-dressed man in his mid-40s who carried a clipboard and wore a wireless earpiece and had the manner of someone who treated the logistics of a public event as though they were operations in a theater of war. He looked at Liam's truck. He looked at the tarp-covered shape on the flatbed. He looked at Liam. "You're the support mechanic?" he said. Liam confirmed this. Jackson handed him a parking diagram and told him the designated area for support personnel was in Zone C, at the back of the plaza, away from the primary display areas. He added, "And whatever that is on the trailer, keep it out of the sight line from the main entrance. We have press positioning up front." Liam took the diagram and drove to the designated zone. He parked, stepped out, and began his contracted work with the economy of motion that comes from doing a thing many times unhurried, precise, uninterested in being noticed. Arya climbed down from the cab and stood in the staging area with Dusty under her arm, looking at the vehicles being moved into position across the plaza with the clear, undisguised wonder of a child in the presence of beautiful things. "Dad," she said, "they're all so beautiful." Liam set a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Beautiful things that don't know they're beautiful," he told her, "are the most valuable ones." Arya looked up at him with the expression of a child filing a sentence away for later, and he left her on a low concrete step near the truck where he could see her, and went back to work. Evelyn Holt arrived at the plaza at 10:30, moving through the event space with the practiced efficiency of someone who had given the same tour many times and knew exactly which angles photographed well. She wore a dove-gray pencil skirt and a structured jacket, and her presence rearranged the behavior of everyone around her in the subtle, reflexive way that seniority always did. People straightened, conversations shortened, eyes redirected. The journalist from the news outlet walked alongside her with a small camera crew, catching the walkthrough for the brand profile piece. She reached the support zone at the rear of the plaza while making a circuit of the event perimeter, and that was where she saw the trailer. The canvas tarp had been partially pulled back on one side. Liam had been checking a tie-down strap and had not yet repositioned it, and the exposed section of the car caught the morning light in a way that was difficult to ignore. The raw, corroded bodywork, the surface of what had once been paint, the dull gleam of oxidized metal where the finish had fallen away entirely. Evelyn stopped walking. She looked at the car, then she looked at Liam, who was crouched beside one of the collector vehicles with a rag in his hand, working without awareness of her presence. Then she looked at Jackson, who had materialized at her shoulder as he generally did. "What is that?" she said, and the direction of the question made clear it was not being asked of the man whose car it was. Jackson began to explain that it appeared to belong to the support mechanic, and Evelyn was already moving toward the trailer before he had finished the sentence. She stood beside the exposed bodywork and looked at it the way a person looks at something